Hello, and welcome to this episode of the MDOT Contract Management Academy. My name is Lorian Lipton. This video series explains contract management topics and how to apply them in the real world in just a few minutes. Today, we're going to discuss 3 issues of contract scope creep and how to avoid them. In a previous episode called What is Scope Creep, I explained that contract scope is like a box. Everything the contract says you're to deliver should fit in the box. The tasks, the materials, the budget, the timeline, everything outside the box is out of scope. Scope creep is when people try to put things in the scope box that were not planned for in the original contract. And that can burst the seams of the scope box. That is scope creep. Now, I know it may seem hard to believe, but the number one reason for scope creep is just poorly defined requirements, which lead to unclear scope in the contract document. The requirements are the foundation of the work effort. If things are not well defined at the start, then everything built on that foundation can be wobbly. The budget can be off, the schedule could be incorrect. You get the idea. You can't always avoid receiving contracts with poorly defined scope, but as the contract manager, you can manage it. First, I figure out what's in scope when I receive the contract, the specified labor, the written requirements, all the deliverables. Now I have a list of what's in scope. I double and triple check it with the stakeholders to make sure they understand what's in scope. My goal is to get everyone on the same page, because if people know what's in scope, then it makes my job a lot easier when I have to tell them it's out of scope. So the number one way I avoid scope creep is to have a clear scope statement, which includes detailed requirements that everyone understands and agrees to. Which brings me to the second major cause of scope creep, lack of communication. Just because I made a list of what I think is in scope, it's meaningless if everybody doesn't agree. If a stakeholder doesn't understand what's in the box, they may want to increase quantities or even change the direction of the contract. So make sure everyone understands what's in scope. And to do that, make your list, get them to review the list, and get them to agree. Over communicate the scope. There is power in communication. It's hard for someone to say they didn't know what was in the scope if they signed a document that stated they did. Now, I know you're going to say, but Lorian, my problem is there's a lot of undocumented conversation and side agreements between people on the contract, adding and changing things outside of the agreed to scope. Yes, that is the third major issue. Everyone's busy, and it's not uncommon for project managers or other people in the field to try to solve problems and make changes without consulting the team or the contract manager. But their actions can and do affect the overall scope of the contract. Remember, scope creep is unapproved and undocumented additions or modifications to the contract after the contract has begun. Changes made on telephone calls, side conversations, even handshakes, they all happen. However, if they're not approved and not formally added to the contract, they're out of scope. But you can't hold people responsible for making changes if they don't know how to make changes. You need to have a documented control process that everyone understands. At MDOT, it's right in the contract. To communicate it, I go over it at the kickoff meeting. I make sure everyone knows how to make changes. If it's not in the box, they need to send me a change request. or it doesn't get in the scope. So to summarize, number one, make sure that everyone agrees to what's in the scope box. If they don't, keep doing the list until they do. That may mean a contract amendment right from the start. However, that happens. Number two, communicate what is in the initial scope and over communicate any changes to the scope and get agreement again and again. And number three, use a change control process for everyone, no exceptions. Communicate you will not tolerate undocumented changes or side agreements. If it's not in the box, it's not in the contract. When I do all this, I have a better chance of delivering on time, on budget, and in the quality I intended. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Contract Management Academy. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel playlist. Until next time, I'm Lorian Lipton. Stay well and keep learning.